What's up, guys? I'm here with an Unholy DK DPS guide for Legion patch, the pre-patch, patch 7.0.3. In this guide, I'm going to go over your talents, your spells and abilities, your stat priority, and then a single target and AoE rotation, as well as a quick demo of each, and then just macros and add-ons that you can consider using to help you out. Let's go ahead and jump right into the talents. In your first tier, you're going to want to use Ebb and Fever, typically. It just makes your disease tick twice as fast, essentially. And it just does good damage for you. Now, if the fight is really short, like sub 1 minute, because you're blowing up the boss really fast, you can use Bursting Swords instead, and we'll combine that with other talents that are really well suited for super short fights. Also, just not performing as well as the other two talents right now, so I recommend these two. So, Ebb and Fever by default, and then Bursting Swords if it's a really short fight, sub 1 minute. In your next tier, Pestilent Pustules, it will be your go-to. It just for single target, every 6 Festering Wounds you burst, you get 1 rune, so it's just more rune regeneration in a sense. So it's pretty simple, pretty passive, and you'll just see the runes pop up and use them as. And we'll get into how that works exactly in the rotation. If again the fight is really short, for single target, again, sub 1 minute, you can use Blighted Rune Weapon instead, and just make your auto attacks, the next 4, apply a couple of Festering Wounds, which just helps the opening burst, which is why it's really good in a short fight. And then for AoE, I recommend Epidemic. It's really good for AoE, and it just does so much damage, especially if things aren't super stacked up, but we'll get into that later. So, Pestilent Pustules for single target, for like a generic fight, Blighted Rune Weapon for a very short single target fight, under 1 minute, and then Epidemic for AoE. For your next tier, Clawing Shadow is your best pretty much always by default. It just changes your Scourge Strike from a melee ability that's split between physical and shadow damage into all shadow damage, which then all benefits from your mastery. And it also is a 30-yard range and does a little bit more damage than the combined damage of Scourge Strike. So it's a damage buff, it's a buff, another damage buff because of mastery, and it's got a range on it so that in case you're not in melee range of the boss at some point for running out of mechanics or something like that, you can still do DPS. The other two just don't stand up right now. Castigator is just it's all based off critical strikes, and you don't get that much crit. Well, you shouldn't be stacking that much crit as Unholy. And then Unholy Frenzy just increases your attack speed, which isn't increasing your, I don't believe it increases your rune regen, and it only lasts 2 seconds, so they're just not really matched up in utility and damage to Clawing Shadows right now. In your level 60 talents, none of these actually really improve your DPS. Debilitating Infestation is just a slow, so if you need a slow for some reason, you can use that. Asphyxiate, just like before, it's a ranged stun. It's on a slightly longer cooldown now, but it's there if you need a stun on an ad. And in general, I just default to Sludge Belcher. It doesn't buff its damage, but it does give you some nifty stuff like Hook. Its own defensive is a little bit better, and just some other buffed abilities, but none of them do more damage than your regular ghoul. So I like it, and it's kind of cute. It's little Stitches Abomination type thing. It's adorable. But yes, so whatever kind of suits your needs in this tier. Level 75, these are all also less DPS oriented. Sorry. But I would probably default to Lingering Apparition. It's a movement speed buff essentially, so your 1 minute cooldown makes you move faster during that, and it lowers the cooldown, so it's kind of a nice buff to your movement speed ability, if you need that. Corpse Shield, it's a 1 minute cooldown. It makes your ghoul take 90% of the damage you take, so it's basically a 90% damage reduction to your pet, but if your pet dies, it puts it on a 30-second cooldown even if it was under that. So you have to be really careful with this, and what I would recommend is if you want to use this, macro it together with your ghoul or Sludge Belcher's Protective Bile skill. Protective Bile is what it's called when it's a Sludge Belcher, and I believe it's called Huddle when it's a ghoul. You macro those together just to make sure that your pet doesn't die, because it'll reduce the damage it takes from that. And then Spell Eater, if you need a bigger AMS to soak up more magic, like a bigger magic hit, and possibly to get more runic power, you can use this, and that could be like a slight DPS increase perhaps, if there's a predictable point where you can grab more runic power through standing in certain mechanics, but it just buffs your anti-magic shell. So I kind of use whatever you need for each fight. This was one you can definitely change up. And then in level 90, Shadow Infusion is going to be a go-to. It just lets you get more Dark Transformations off as you Death Coil. And it's generally just really good because Dark Transformation is quite important to your DPS. Now again, if the fight is super short though, like sub 1 minute, you will take Infected Claws. It'll just do a little more, give you more immediate benefits than Shadow Infusion, because you might not ever get that second A-bomb up, say. For example, so if it's a short fight, Infected Claws, Blighted Rune Weapon, Bursting Swords, kind of combine those three. If not, you can take this setup for single target, Ebon Fever, Pestilent Pustules, and Shadow Infusion. And then if you have AoE, just switch to Epidemic here. The last talent, recommend Dark Arbiter pretty much all the time, especially if you have the Legendary Ring, because it really adds to your burst. It's really, really good. It basically replaces Gargoyle with a much cooler looking Valkyria, but also buffs its damage for every runic power you spend. So if you can spam a bunch of Death Coils, it makes it hit really, really hard, and it really increases your burst a lot. Defile is really crap right now. It barely does more than Death and Decay. And Soul Reaper, if you don't have the Legendary Ring and the fight goes, I'll say, I'm kind of guesstimating here, about 2 to 3 minutes, so basically, well, you've had the most downtime possible on Dark Arbiter. Like, if you use it at the start, and it's about to come off cooldown, but then the fight ends, and you don't have the ring, then you could make a case for Soul Reaper. I'll explain how to use it briefly, but I do recommend Dark Arbiter in general. And even if you don't have the ring, it's probably not that bad to use Dark Arbiter, and get used to it anyway. So that's it for talents. Let's go ahead and start looking at your spells and abilities as an Unholy Death Knight. So the first one you have is Outbreak, and Outbreak costs 1 rune, and it applies your disease. And the disease, every time it does damage, it does like a little explosion, and when the target dies, it also does a little explosion. So it's got a little AoE component to it, and it does infect multiple things around the target. That's pretty simple. 1 rune, puts your disease in an AoE area. Very nice. Then we have Scourge Strike, which, because I'm using Clawing Shadows, the talent is called Clawing Shadows. Another rune ability, and then it just does damage, and it causes a festering wound to explode. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's just go and take a look at the next ability, which is called Festering Strike. Now, this costs 2 runes, and it does physical damage, and it infects the target with anywhere from 2 to 4 festering wounds. So festering wounds is a debuff, and when you Scourge Strike it, or Clawing Shadows, it blows up and does damage, and gives you runic power. So these two kind of work together here. So Festering Strike puts on these wounds, and then Clawing Shadow will explode it, but we'll get more into that in the rotation section. To dump runic power, we've got Death Coil. It's 35 runic power. It's got a 40-yard range, and it just does damage. Interesting things to note, it does affect your Dark Transformation cooldown if you took Shadow Infusion. Only while, so you pop Dark Transformation, and for 20 seconds, it's just whatever, it does cool damage, etc. After it drops off, then your Death Coils will start to lower the cooldown, not during. But again, more on that in the rotation. You do have Death Strike. It costs runic power though, so it's going to be hurting your DPS if you have to use it, but it is there as a heal if you do need it. But I don't really recommend using that too often in raiding. And then you have Army of the Dead. It costs 3 runes like before, 10-minute cooldown. But unlike before in WoD, where it's basically worthless, like tickled the boss, it actually does a significant amount of damage now, so it's worth using during high burst periods if you have to, but you can still use it at the start of the fight as well, just like you were before. But it's actually okay now if there's a big period of increased damage, say, in the raid, and you could start summoning them right before that. So it is worth that now. It's worth using. Of course, we have our Taunt, Dark Command. We have Death and Decay for AoE, which we don't really use for single target as Unholy. They've got Dark Transformation. It's a 1-minute cooldown. It's completely free. Turns your ghoul or cute abomination here into a giant monstrosity. It increases the damage it does slightly, and it also increases the cleave. It changes one of its abilities into a cleave and AoE thing rather than single target. We've got Icebound Fortitude for a little defensive cooldown. 20% reduction, breaks stuns, 3-minute cooldown. Of course, we have our Battle Res and Raise Ally. Our Raise Dead, you want to make sure you have your pet up at all times, but it does have a 1-minute cooldown if you let it die. And then whatever talents we took, in this case I have Corpse Shield right now, because I think I left it on for PvP. But that's fine. And then we've got Wraith Walk for movement. You press it, you move faster, but anything you do, any action you take during that time, will break the effect. And then of course we have a Dark Arbiter, or normally Summon Gargoyle. If you take the Dark Arbiter talent, it changes it into this. 3-minute cooldown, it's free, and it does damage. And then Chains of Ice if you need to slow something. So those are your spells and abilities. Now let's go ahead and take a quick peek at stat priority. As an Unholy DK, you want Haste as your top stat. It is really, really good. It reduces the cooldown on your rune regeneration and your attack speed, but mostly the rune regeneration is really, really important as an Unholy DK, because you got some things that you kind of want to manage, and you want to have runes up consistently, to facilitate that. After Haste, you've got Mastery. Now, Mastery increases the shadow damage you do by quite a bit. It's quite good, and you do a lot of shadow damage. The only thing that's physical, I believe, is Festering Strike right now. Now, if you had not Clawing Shadows, then there's part of Scourge Strike that's physical, but because you should probably take it, or I recommend you take it, it's all shadow. So Mastery is really, really good, busts a lot of your damage. And after that, crit and then versatility. Neither really have an interaction with Unholy DK. So those are your lowest two. So again, to recap, Haste, then Mastery, then crit, and then versatility. Alright, now let's go ahead and get into single target rotation. So what you're going to want to do is you want to prioritize always getting your plague up, your virulent plague. So you want to make sure you outbreak and just have that rolling. So as long as it's active, that's good. You just want to make sure there's no downtime with it. After that, you want to make sure that you apply... you definitely want a Dark Transformation whenever it's up as much as possible. Really, really important. And then, of course, if you have Dark Arbiter, you want that cooldown up as well. Now, in terms of using Dark Arbiter, it's actually important that you pull up lots of runic power. Ideally, full 100 runic power, but if you're close, like 90, 95-ish, something like around there, that's okay as well. The reason is, as soon as you pop it, you want to be able to spam your runic power ability, your Death Coil, to buff your Dark Arbiter's damage as much as possible while it's still alive. So you do have to do a little preparation work for Dark Arbiter. If you're using Shadow Infusion, you can also do a little bit of prep work with Dark Transformation. As it's ending, you might want to pull up a little bit more so you can spam some Death Coils to kind of get it up more quickly. But that's not quite as important. It's something to think about. Little like bonus damage by raising the reducing the cooldown on it. But just keep that in mind. So far, keep your plague up. Dark Transformation on cooldown. Dark Arbiter on cooldown, especially if you can line up cooldowns like Ring, and again, pulling your runic power before you use it. And then after that, you want to make sure you have some Festering Wounds on the target, at least one. So if you don't, then use Festering Strike to put some on. And then after that, you can Clawing Shadows the target to explode those. Now, don't Clawing Shadows if there are no Festering Wounds, because you're losing out on damage that way. And then dump your runic power with Death Coil. So that's your single target rotation. Nothing too crazy. Just kind of got to watch timers. Like, make sure your buffs and debuffs aren't falling off. Keep an eye on your Dark Arbiter timer to make sure that you know when it's coming up, so you can pull up some runic power. And then just kind of Dark Transformation as much as possible. Alright, now let's go ahead and I'll show you guys on this dummy how the single target rotation kind of plays out. When you open, one thing that's important is you can do things like drop a Death and Decay off to the side somewhere where it's not going to hit anything, and make sure you actually de-target the boss, because otherwise your little pet is actually going to run in and start combat, which can be really awkward in a raid. But you can, for example, use Death and Decay and then use Army to kind of build up runic power before the pull. And then go in, and when you go in, want to build up as much runic power as possible, drop Dark Transformation, and then kind of go from there. So I'll go ahead and start the pull. So remember, detarget, maybe Death and Decay over here, then I pull Army, and then we'll just go ahead and outbreak, Dark Transformation, and put some Festering Wounds on, build some power here, and then we could probably Dark Arbiter. Army would have given us more initial as well, but spend as much as possible. Always, and then just pop these Festering Wounds and just try to dump as much runic power until your Dark Arbiter is gone. Once it's gone, you can go back to the normal rotation. So we need Outbreak, and then we want to pop these Festering Wounds with our Clawing Shadows. Just want to pop those till they're gone, and then now we're out, so we want to put some Festering Wounds up, dump some runic power into Death Coil, and then just pop some more of these. So we're always popping these. Now keep an eye, see I have Outbreak is almost gone, so I put that back up. Now Dark Transformation is up, so I'll use that. Put some more wounds on because I'm out, and then pop them with Scourge Strike / Clawing Shadows. Don't cap your runic power, just make sure you don't accidentally do that. And then put some more wounds on when you're out, and then dump runic power, pop some more of these, keep Outbreak up, and pop some more wounds. And that is your rotation, pretty much. Just remember to pull your runic power before you get Dark Arbiter up, and when it's really close to coming back up. That way you can burst harder. So that's your single target rotation, pretty much just managing those few things. I'll briefly talk about if you were using Soul Reaper instead of Dark Arbiter, which I don't really recommend, even if you don't have the ring. But if you are, you just kind of fit this in. You just want to make sure that you do it right before you do Clawing Shadow, and you want to have at least 3 Festering Wounds up. So what you'll do is you'll do your, put your Outbreak up, keep your cooldowns rolling when you need to, and then when you get to putting Festering Strikes on, get at least 3, and then Soul Reaper, and then do 3 Clawing Shadows so you get the haste buff from it, and that's pretty much how you use it. It does cost a rune, so you just kind of weave it in there right before you start spamming Clawing Shadow to pop those wounds. As far as AoE goes, so I'll go ahead and switch to Epidemic here to show you guys how that works. So AoE, what you want to do is you want to, same thing, you want to have your Outbreak, so you got to have that Plague going, that's your most important thing. And of course you want your Dark Transformation because it turns one of your abilities into a cleave ability, into an AoE ability, so you're doing more damage there. And of course, when you have your cooldown, your Gargoyle, you can use that as well. Same thing, just use whatever runic power you have to kind of buff it. But what's important is you want to Death and Decay after. So Disease, cooldowns, Death and Decay, and you want to stand in it because it actually kind of buffs your AoE while you stand in it. And what it does is it allows your Clawing Shadows to now cleave and hit multiple targets. So the idea is, while they're stacked, you want to Death and Decay after you Disease. So Disease, Death and Decay, stand in the Death and Decay, and then basically spam Clawing Shadows. Now as soon as the Death and Decay goes away, like it disappears, then you can start using Epidemic, and that's where you'll kind of go through your Epidemic charges and hit those. Also, if the targets are kind of spread out in a way that you can't get Death and Decay going and you can't cleave off with Clawing Shadows, then you can use this as well. But in general, you want to just have Death and Decay up as often as possible, and then while it's up, stand in it, cleave off with Clawing Shadows, and then when you're done with that, either because Death and Decay is over, pretty much, then you want to Epidemic. And then after that, you can Festering Strike if you have no need for anything else, just to put some wounds up. But everything else comes before that. Now, ideally, if there is a fight where you're doing AoE, but only for part of the fight, you want to stack your Festering Wounds as high as possible, up to 8 stacks. If you can, on a target before the AoE comes in, so that way you don't have to use it, and you get this added bonus of the wounds blowing up and doing some AoE damage, just kind of like doing extra damage, rather, to the ad while you're doing your AoE rotation. But if you don't stack it up before, don't try to stack it up during your AoE rotation, it'll just lower your deeps. So, to recap again, Outbreak, you want to keep that disease rolling always. Dark Transformation, as much as possible, your cooldowns. And then Death and Decay, stand in it, Clawing Shadows, until your Death and Decay expires. And once that's gone, then Epidemic. And then if you literally have nothing else to do, you can put some Festering Wounds on whatever you're focusing, like a high priority ad or something. So I'll go ahead and show you guys on these dummies here. So we'll start, I'll put Outbreak up, get Dark Transformation up, Death and Decay, and then just Clawing Shadows and cleave until Death and Decay goes away. And I can spend some runic power to buff the Arbiter. So it's going away now. So now I want to actually Epidemic. But you still remember, so I have Outbreak. It's about to expire, so I want to rebuff that. And then Epidemic. And then you just kind of wait here. So Epidemic again. Now Death and Decay is coming up pretty soon. So I'm going to want to Death and Decay. And then Clawing Shadows. And that'll kind of cleave off here. Now again, you see Outbreak is about to come off, or Virulent Plague rather, so I'll reapply that. And then dump here, and then Clawing Shadows. Now it's gone, so I'll Epidemic now instead. And Epidemic here. And Epidemic until it's gone. Now at this point, I can Dark Transformation again, but I can put some wounds on because I don't need the Clawing Shadows yet, and I'll put Outbreak back on. Now Death and Decay is coming up again, so I'll put that up, and now I'll start using Clawing Shadows to cleave because I'm standing in Death and Decay. And that's take priority over Epidemic until this Death and Decay goes away. And now it's about gone, so now I will use Epidemic to AoE. I'll put the Outbreak back on soon because it's coming off. You know, dump with Death Coil, of course, your runic power. And there's the Epidemic there. And then Epidemic as it comes up. And now I don't have anything, so I'll put some wounds on with Festering Strike. Waiting for Death and Decay, now it's up. Drop that, and again back to Scourge Strike / Clawing Shadows again. So that's how it goes, and you know, watch your cooldowns. Dark Transformation comes up quite often. And you keep your diseases rolling, etc., etc. So that's your AoE rotation. Of course, you will put in your, probably at the start, you put in your Dark Arbiter of the fights. You might not even have it for the AoE, but if you do, you can drop it to line up with cooldowns and such. So you basically, whenever Death and Decay is up, you want to Clawing Shadows with it and send in it so you cleave, and then Epidemic if you don't while that's up. And if literally nothing else is up and you just have extra runes, you can Festering Strike, but do not lose out on your other abilities just to try to Festering Strike because it doesn't actually add that much to AoE. So that's pretty much it for the two rotation types. Now as far as add-ons and macros go, I don't really use any macros right now for this, actually, except for the Corpse Shield one, which I'll show you here and also put in the description below. But if you want to check it out, this is just what I'm using. This way, it will always, when you cast it, your pet will also automatically cast its defensive, assuming it has enough energy. And it kind of prevents it from dying. But again, you don't necessarily use it that often. It's kind of up to you if you even want to use this talent. And then for add-ons, I was using weak auras. You probably saw during the demonstrations, just kind of to track different things. I have weak auras that kind of track Festering Wound and a timer for it, as well as Virulent Plague, the Outbreak disease, and its timer, just to kind of keep track of that. And I also keep track of the stacks on Festering Wound, so I know how many I have, in case you want to use like Soul Reaper, but it's just nice for me to know. That's pretty much it. So if you guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did like it, feel free to hit the like button. If you'd like to see videos like this in the future, feel free to subscribe to the channel so you can see what's going on and what's new. And I hope you guys enjoy. Cheers.